A few years ago, I had to conduct about 6 funerals, one after the other, and one of them being that of my dear niece Jacqueline. I suppose we can grow a bit immune to the daily tally of disasters, wars, pandemics, and other deaths when they are presented simply as stark statistics, but it's quite a different matter when death pitches up as a cruel, unwanted visitor to your own home, invades your life, and tears the heart from you and your family. We all know that it's going to happen to us sooner or later, but we can choose not to dwell on it because it might stop us functioning altogether. But all of you, I'm sure, can look back and wonder not how you ever got over someone's dying, you never do get over it, do you? But how you got through it and were able to carry on. And you probably find that many of the same images and words feature in everybody's story. People speak about their world falling apart, the feet being taken from under them, about feeling disoriented, all the signs that we have come to associate with a sudden earthquake, a violent upheaval, a sense of chaos and panic, of wandering through a strange, unfamiliar world. When Jesus gathered his disciples around him for that fateful Last Supper together, he knew what lay just round the corner, his death, and the profound sense of loss and separation that the disciples would experience. And in his account, John tells us that Jesus said to them, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Trust in God still and trust in me." John chapter 14, verse 1. The Greek verb used by John there for troubled is tarasein, which means literally to shudder, to shake, to feel that you're about to go to pieces. Literally, the ground is going to be taken from under you. Now, Jesus no more wanted to die and be separated from his dearest friends than they did. That was the measure of the humanity that he chose to share with them and with us. He wanted to experience what we all experience when faced with the reality of death close to home. Already, however, earlier in the Gospel, that same verb, tarasein, has appeared. First of all, when Jesus was told that his good friend Lazarus had died, leaving his two sisters, Martha and Mary, distraught in tears. And we're told by John, Jesus shuddered and he wept. The shortest verse in the whole Bible, John 11:35, Jesus wept. And the word appears again when he finally goes up to Jerusalem for the final Passover, and he's approached by some non-Jews, Gentiles, who want to meet him and quiz him about what they have to benefit from being associated with him. What does he have to offer them? And he chose to speak to them again about dying as part of living. In fact, as being part and essential for growth and progress in life. And he goes on to confess to them that the prospect of what lies ahead for him troubled him. There you have the same verb again, 12:27. No, he trusts that the Father knows what he's doing. He trusts. Remember, the Bible word for trust, for having faith, is amen, from the Aramaic root verb amin, which means to stand firm. Jesus might shudder and shake at the prospect of what lay ahead, but he doesn't go to pieces. He stands firm in the love that he knows the Father has for him. And that's the message he wants his disciples to hear. All of his disciples. Death is not all that it may appear to be. It's not the end, life finished over and done with. It's the end, yes, of what we have become accustomed to and to have maybe taken for granted. And it has been good. And that includes the people we have loved and who have loved us, sometimes cruelly separated from us and often without warning. But Jesus wants us to know the truth so beautifully expressed in that little poem by the American Rossiter Raymond. Life is eternal and love is immortal, and death is only an horizon, and an horizon is nothing save the limit of our sight. The very same insight was shared by the 14th century medieval hermit Julian of Norwich in her classic little masterpiece, Revelations of Divine Love. There she wrote, "He, Jesus, did not say, 'You shall not be tempest-tossed, you shall not be work-weary, you shall not be discomforted,' but he did say, 'You shall not be overcome.'" Jesus wants us to experience for ourselves what the cross and death would mean for him. It meant and it means being lifted up from this life with all its limitations and dangers and struggles. It means to shuffle off the mortal coil, as Shakespeare's Hamlet puts it in that famous soliloquy, "To be or not to be," which many of you will have learned at school. Jesus embraces with open, widespread arms the new life that God offers and has planned for all of us. So Jesus could say, "Do not let your hearts be troubled." But he never could say, "Do not be sad," or "do not cry." He himself cried, as the second reading of today's Mass assures us, Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7 to 9. It is one of my all-time favourite passages from the Scriptures because it reveals to me that we have a God who was prepared to share all our human experiences, all except for sin, and that included death and all that comes with death. And the letter to the Hebrews tells us that Jesus prayed aloud and in silent tears, "Do I have to go through this?" We've all been there. We've all wept, and more often wept silently, because we let ourselves love and be loved. It's a dangerous, painful game. We weep when people we love make mistakes, and we have to let them. We weep when they do well and make us feel proud. We weep when they begin to wither and fade before our eyes, and we cannot take away their pain on ourselves. And we weep when they finally leave us in death. It is good to weep. From the earliest times, Christians have spoken of and prayed for what's called the gift of tears. What they're praying for is not something soft and sentimental or self-indulging, but for the grace to appreciate the love we have experienced in life from family, from friends, from God. Such love that we would want to weep at the very thought of not respecting and honouring by letting it make us more loving in return. In the 3rd and 4th centuries, the Desert Fathers, groups of devout hermits and monks, saw this gift of tears as the most effective remedy against what they saw as their greatest enemy, the sin of acedia, a word that means in Greek, couldn't care less. It's that listless, can't be bothered, what's the point attitude that at times can paralyse us and leave us in the doldrums. It's that very attitude that can take hold of us precisely when we are grieving the loss of someone we loved. We can become over-focused on ourselves and our loss rather than on how grateful we should be for having been privileged to love and be loved by them. In today's Gospel, Jesus tackles this issue head on. He speaks of the grain of wheat which has to be buried in the soil and die, what we call germination, so that it can produce the wheat. Each one of us is like a single grain. Now we can choose to live enclosed in ourselves, happy to remain a single grain, full of potential for love and life, but not giving it. That's what Jesus means by loving your life. Or you can be willing to let the hard shell protecting you be broken, opening yourself up to others, loving and being loved, painful though that be. That's what Jesus means when he speaks in the strange phrase of hating your life in this world. Jesus wants us to accept that dying is part of living, letting go is part of loving, and that's what our baptism introduced us into, the daily lifelong dying to self-centeredness and self-protection, and an opening of ourselves up to new opportunities, responding to new challenges, becoming more fully alive in ourselves, and so becoming life-giving for others. And that's why in the fourth gospel, the cross is no longer seen as a sign of failure, a symbol simply of death, but it becomes a throne where love finally reveals its true strength and scope and reigns supreme. Jesus on the cross wants to draw all people to himself, to pass with him to the new life and love of Easter. In the grave where they laid him, men who had slain love thought that never would he wake again, as he lay in the earth like the grain that sleeps unseen. Yet love is come again, like wheat that springeth green. In the fourth gospel, written, it is claimed, by the beloved disciple, John couldn't contain himself and wait for the 50 days till Pentecost. He tells us that when Jesus died, at that moment, he handed over the Spirit. He doesn't just say he breathed his last. It's the traditional word for tradition, handing something precious over. His Spirit, the life-giving Spirit, love divine, he handed it over to the little group gathered there around the cross. And that will be us on Good Friday. From the cross, Jesus challenges us not to remain a single grain, but to die and let others die so that new life can emerge. T.S. Eliot got it right in the 4 quartets. In my end is my beginning. Good Friday leads to Easter. Take care. God bless.